This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend. I've walked your snow-capped mountains.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is October 1st, 2020, and this is episode 209.
I'm Stuart Londonboom.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. On today's show, we're about a week and a half into the election. The candidate deadline is tomorrow, and the biggest promise so far is a PST holiday. Thank you to the 98 people who contribute every month. Thanks especially to our newest patrons, Peter, Alana, and Matthew. We're still at 98 patrons, though, despite gaining 3 new people. And Patreon won't tell me exactly why, but I suspect it's because some people's credit cards have expired or something similar to that. So please double check your credit card number. Consider throwing some support to the show at patreon.com/politicos. And given that we're in the midst of an election, I've been seeing that our metrics have been ticking up as people are looking for coverage and insights into this ongoing BC election. We're going to have episodes each week breaking things down and possibly even some bonus content, for example, following the debates that happen whenever they happen. Our Slack channel is also extremely lively as our patrons debate each new policy announcement as they come up. So tell more people to check out the show and support us at patreon.com/politicos. Politicos is in partnership with BC Today, British Columbia's daily newsletter dedicated exclusively to BC politics. Sign up for a free trial to have unique coverage of the BC legislature delivered to your inbox every morning. Listeners to Politicos enter the offer code CITIZEN for access to a special rate. For your free 2-week trial of the newsletter, go to politicstoday.news/free-trial. And we were on Ontario Loud this past week, so you can check out that episode on its feed, wherever you found us. Look for them. And we'll be on the next episode of Dave Berta, as we're scheduled to talk with Dave Cornway this weekend. Apparently, every other politics podcast across the country wants to talk to us, so those are some good ones. Check them out. Let's jump into the promises made a week in. I think the biggest headline of the week, and the one that had everyone talking, was the first real announcement of any of the parties, the BC Liberals saying they would eliminate the PST for a year if elected and then make it 3% until the economy recovers.
This definitely generated a lot of discussion earlier in the week and actually finally moved the conversation on from whether or not we should be having an election to, I guess we better actually, talk about what we're doing this election. The Liberals rolled this out Monday morning, and it's definitely a bold promise and the boldest one put forward so far. It's not one that's been, I think, universally well received, but I think does have the potential to be quite a good move for the Liberals overall.
They needed something to get attention. We'll get to the polls as a mention at the end of the segment, but they're down somewhere between 15 and 20 points, depending which one numbers you look at, which is a really bad place for them. And, this is a headline getter. The Liberals are estimating this would save the average household $1,700 a year. I had trouble getting to that exact number. That presumes that your average household is spending $25,000 on taxable items, which is stretched if the average household is making 60 to 80K. But it will save a lot of people, and people see the PST every day every time they go to the stores. You don't see it directly often, but it hits you at the cash register.
Yeah, and it's that hitting at the cash register that I think makes it particularly annoying and visceral attacks, because I've been shopping in stores for quite a long time now, and every time there's still the little part of me that forgets the PST whenever I go up to the register, and it hits me when there, because it's just mentally a little annoying not to have the PST included in our sales prices up front. So it's the sort of thing that everybody deals with, whether it's, PST on things you buy at the store or like your cell phone bill or whatever. There's a lot of things that the PST covers, and that can definitely add up. And a 7% decrease in people's consumer costs, it's not nothing, and it's something that is very broadly applicable across the province, which it makes it a somewhat good policy. So like, this isn't what I would have chosen if someone had come to me and said, okay, you have $7 to $8 billion you want to spend to help kind of boost the economy, make people's lives a little better during the economic slowdown. But it's also not terrible either, and I don't hate it, because it is something that really does add up for a lot of lower income families. In particular, 7% is not nothing, and in some ways it may have been better than just spending that like $7 or $8 billion and cutting a check to everyone, because this way, rather than wealthy people who don't really need the money just stocking it away or paying down some debt or whatever, the benefits only really accrue when you actually go out and spend the money and purchase things. So in that way, it's a little more kind of directly targeted towards both kind of lower income families and overall towards boosting economic activity.
So the $7 to $8 billion, there's a number of things I want to pick off on there and talk about. The $7 to $8 billion number is the estimated revenue that BC takes in for PST. It's apparently our second largest line item on the revenue side of the government's income statement, right below income taxes. So this is a big hole in the budget. The Liberals haven't said how they would fill that hole. They have promised not to cut education or healthcare, though, but they kind of left it open in the longer term to where half of that money, where we're at that 3%, is how they would pay for that, because there is some element of you can't just have a structural deficit. I think we'd both agree that with interest rates the way they are, one-time cash injections are a very smart idea, but cutting your revenue side down longer term becomes a bit more dicey.
Yeah.
That said, you are right, though, that the PST and progressive economists will talk about this, or at least left economists will talk about this. Sales taxes tend to be very regressive in that they're kind of like a flat tax. They hit everyone the same, and people who are at the lower end of the income spectrum tend to spend more of their money, because it turns out it's really hard to spend hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. So a lot of it just gets stored away and not taxed. So as a percent of a person's household income, someone who's in the lower income brackets will be spending more of their income on this tax.
It was interesting on kind of Monday morning to suddenly watch, years of arguments that the consumption taxes are regressive suddenly flip on their head in a matter of hours, where people who'd for years had been making that argument suddenly switched to a case where it is now suddenly regressive to make cuts to consumption taxes.
I think that it is true. Like, it's still true that it's a regressive tax, but it's also true that the largest savings will be at the highest incomes because they are just spending more. So a household making several $100,000 a year will save more money because of this cut. Now, that said, I still generally would shy away personally if we were restructuring our tax system from sales taxes without some kind of redistribution, like the GST has a tax credit associated with it that helps offset the costs for lower income households. I think where progressives and especially partisan New Democrats bristled at this suggestion was that it's unclear what the hammer is, that question about how are they going to pay for it? Because if the Liberals are taking a chunk out of the revenue side, eventually they're probably going to take a chunk out of the spending side. And that's where things can become not progressive.
Well, I like the suggestion that was floated that this was like a 5D chess move to finally bring in an HST when there's suddenly a revenue hole that needs to be patched in a few years. Probably not what the Liberals are actually thinking.
I think overthinking bringing in the HST was one of the downfalls of Gordon Campbell. If he'd have been more honest about it and not run in the election that he wasn't going to do it and then done it, people would have been less pissed about it. But it's definitely a weird third rail in this province at this point.
But yeah, that long-term deficit or structural problems with the finance is what does have me most concerned about it. You know, a one-year sales tax holiday by itself is a pretty reasonable thing to do in the midst of a pretty bad economic hit, especially when interest rates are low. The part I don't like is the phrase "until the economy recovers."
That's not specific enough for you?
No, not at all. And like, it's very easy to see a scenario where that just becomes the new permanent tax rate for the PST, because like, let's think about how this might play out. So Andrew Wilkinson somehow manages to pull off a miraculous win in October. New budget comes in February. You got the PST. The 1 year runs out in February 2022. The economy's still pretty sluggish, so you're up to 3%, but maybe by 2023 or even 2024, you've recovered the lost ground. But now there's an election within 18 to 0 months away. And does anyone really expect that, in the run up to an election, someone's going to put in a 4% PST increase?
Definitely a good point there. The last thing I have on this is the pitch and the way it's framed is around trying to essentially stimulate spending. It's not just about putting money in people's pockets, but it's about actually encouraging more spending, since if you have an additional $1,700, you'll maybe go out and spend that, and that will help small businesses, etc., and keep the economy flowing. That, I think, like you were saying earlier, I'm not as confident that that's the most effective way. Like you said, with $7 to $8 billion in terms of how can we get the economy flowing, I'm not sure that the PST cut will do as much as other more targeted metrics, especially ones that aren't just, a broad across the entire economy. Like what this policy has going for it is that it's simple, it's understandable, and you can just like slap it on an ad. It's 0% for 1 year. Everyone gets it.
Yeah, the communications from the Liberals' point of view actually make this thing a fairly easy sell because it is pretty simple. The other parties' attacks on it have, I think, not really found their footing so much.
I think the strong... Go ahead.
Yeah, the NDP initially came out with attacking it as like a giveaway for the wealthy, which goes against literally decades of progressive arguments on consumption taxes, like we covered before. But also, like it is a thing everybody pays. Everybody not just pays it, but has the experience of paying for it and knows the annoyance of paying the PST. It is so broad and universal that it's really hard to frame this as a tax break for the 1%. And I mean, they can try, but like, I don't think that line of attack's going anywhere. The broader, what do you have to cut to make this work, might be a little better, but I don't know. Even then, I think it's a bit of a struggle on that one.
I think the strongest argument I've seen is that there's a kind of scent of desperation around it. Like it's a swing for the fences that you would expect of a third party that's not serious about policy. Like it kind of screams, hey, we just had this idea. Someone wrote it on the back of an envelope. And sometimes that can work, like getting rid of bridge tolls, it turns out. But getting rid of bridge tolls did not punch an $8 billion hole in the budget. It did punch a hole in the budget, but it was much more manageable.
Yeah, it's also a lot more targeted, though, where this one isn't just about winning a couple ridings in Surrey. So in that respect, it may actually fare better overall for the Liberals.
I mean, the bridge tolls got the NDP government because it does just take a couple ridings. In any case, we'll have to see over the next week how this policy lands. I realize we kind of started this episode off with a deep dive, and then we're going to get into a bunch of other policies.
Yeah, the one final thing I'll say about this, though, is that I think it's an easy sell to a lot of British Columbians that, hey, wouldn't it be great if you paid 7% less every time you went to any store but a grocery store, more or less. I guess bike stores too. But I don't think that's going to be enough to carry them over the finish line. I could see people a lot of interest in them, but people are feeling pretty stressed in a lot of different ways now. And if the only thing that gets offered is, you save 7% when you want to, get a new dishwasher or something, I don't think that's going to be enough. And in the coming weeks, the Liberals are going to have to round out the plan quite a bit if they want to make this work.
Indeed. Well, one of the other elements that they helped round out a little bit, but not actually with many details, was their announcement, I believe it was earlier today or yesterday, about how they would tackle crime and some of the housing issues that are out there. The leader of the BC Liberals, Andrew Wilkinson, announced at a campaign stop that they would restrict camping in city parks, ban roadside panhandling, and look at alternative approaches to mental health and substance emergency calls. The press release that went along with this announcement was roundly mocked by the media somewhat as really vague on details. Jeremy Hainsworth, in the link that we'll include in the show notes from Tri-City News, really just sticks it going. There wasn't anything in here, and the NDP criticism that it's equivalent to a blank piece of paper as a plan kind of landed. I don't know that it's quite nothing, but it does come off a bit mean-spirited in terms of this focus again on restricting tent cities and stuff like that. Policies that people like the Parks Board in the city of Vancouver have tried to enact in other cities around the province. And when they do, when there's not actually housing for the people who are forced to camp in parks, the courts have found that that's an unreasonable bylaw to enact. So the province will have to find a different way to approach this.
Yeah, like the Liberals are touching on something that I think is a real concern to a lot of people. And like the idea that city parks are not really a place for camping and more for general community use for recreation, etc. That's a pretty reasonable position to take on a lot of things with respect to this. The problem comes with the, well, if not there, then where do these people go? And that obviously needs to be covered off in a much more detailed way. And I think it's kind of the big hole in this. But I don't necessarily think talking about the issue is particularly mean-spirited, but it's the case where, the Liberals have identified a real problem, but, at best have a C- proposal on it, if I'm being a little generous.
Well, and they're even attacking some of the moves the BC NDP has made, continuing this narrative that, or this attack line that the efforts to buy hotels, for example, are just quote unquote warehousing people. And it might not be an ideal housing situation, but unless you're offering something better, buying out hotel rooms and that are otherwise empty and putting people who don't have homes in them does feel like an overall policy win. At least until you tell me how we will find housing for the thousands of people who don't otherwise have it and can't afford it. On the other side of the political spectrum, the BC NDP have rolled out their first announcements of the week. The biggest one so far was Horgan's promise on long-term care. He said that there'll be a $1.4 billion plan to expand long-term care over the next 10 years. It was a little vague at first, but it turns out this is largely by renovating existing multi-bed rooms within health regions to become single spaces, so seniors aren't sharing rooms, which feels like a pretty reasonable step, even though it's not creating a lot of new spaces. There's going to be a ramp up in requirements on private care home operators, and the wage top-ups and single site orders that were issued under the pandemic and the emergency orders will become permanent, which are also good because we need to treat our long-term care staff a lot better, it turns out, as if this pandemic has proven at least one thing.
Yeah, this isn't a particularly unexpected platform promise from the NDP. The top up making that permanent, that's not going to be insignificant on the budget. It's about $120 million a year based on the $10 million a month it's costing right now. So, like, it's but like not over enough to be noticeable when you look at the provincial budget, but not, break the bank expensive. Capital expenditures, it's as good a time as, in fact, it's a better time than most to be making those with where things are. So overall reasonable, not a big surprise. Probably a winner for the NDP on that. That the Liberals have not found a particularly good counter to this. So far, their attack on it is being the same one they've been oddly deciding to use on a lot of things, which is, the NDP make a lot of promises and haven't necessarily followed through on them, or aren't good at following through on them. And I'm sure you could pick out individual examples of that, but they've only been in government for 3 and a bit years. Like, they're not going to have got to everything, nor do I really expect British Columbians to think they will have. And more fundamentally, on a strategic level, you want to be talking about the issues where your party naturally has an advantage there. And if it gets into an argument over who's better for long-term care homes, and the Liberals' position is the NDP's, has their heart in the right place, but not actually doing it all, that's not a great position to be in, or a good thing to be using the finite number of words you get in a campaign on.
I think the Greens did have a slightly better response to this promise, as Sonia Furstenau rolled out their first platform plank the day after Horgan made this announcement, which was on long-term care. She emphasized in her view that the NDP plan didn't go far enough, fast enough. It's a $1.4 billion plan, but that's over 10 years. She thinks there needs to be a stronger move away from for-profit care entirely towards what she called community-based facilities. I couldn't find too many more details about what that meant, and it doesn't sound like she's costed out what that would take. It's still early, so maybe we'll see that hopefully in the Green platform when it comes out. And the other idea she had was to make the BC Seniors Advocate an independent officer of the legislature. Currently, that advocate reports to the health ministry, and making them an independent officer in the same way the child officer is, who looks after kids in care, it would give more authority and more prominence to this oversight of long-term care and seniors in the province. So I think that's just a sensible position that hopefully whoever wins will take up. But finding the money will be the real question for the Greens.
Yeah, having the advocates split off from the ministries and under the chain of command of the minister, a couple levels down probably. Don't actually know the org chart, but yeah, taking them away from basically being a subordinate of the minister, in theory, to a person who reports directly to the House makes a lot of sense. So, yeah, good policy proposal there. Hopefully, it gets implemented, just as like a good governance thing.
Otherwise, we haven't seen too much from the Greens. I think they've mostly been focused on finding candidates and trying to build out what their campaign will be. I think they were largely taken or caught off foot on this and are trying to catch up. So there's still a few weeks to go, but we'll see.
Part of that is understandable because Sonia First now is a new leader, quite literally, in the fact that she's only been in the job for about a week when the election was called. On the other hand, Horgan had been dropping hints for a month and a half or so. Like the election shouldn't be a surprise, and the clear front runner won the leadership race. So there should have been more planning in the works with something you could get rolling quicker, even if it's just a couple announcements to not lose the first week of news cycles to the other parties.
And I had thought in my mind for a minute that Andrew Weaver was the interim leader for some reason, but no, it was Adam Olsen, and he could have been taking that role. I think he took his role in the House seriously, and I think he did well there. But like we've seen in a number of other instances politically, Tom Mulcair most famously, being good in the House and in the legislature doesn't necessarily translate into votes on the campaign trail. But just coming back to the campaign trail for 1 minute, a couple of the other promises that came out this week, the NDP also promised to increase the student grant program that they rolled out, I believe, since the last election, up to $4,000, and to create 2,000 additional technology spaces in BC post-secondary education facilities. And there'll be 4 new MRIs in Lower Mainland hospitals to build upon the 8 that they've bought since becoming government. Sort of not niche exactly, but smaller announcements focused on very specific. I think they also talked about building some schools in Coquitlam. So not a lot of big things, but certain sectors, health, education, that the NDP tend to be strong on, like you said, speaking to their strength.
Yeah, on the schools, then they did say they weren't going to prioritize a Olympic Village school, which is probably going to annoy quite a few voters in Vancouver Falls Creek, which is one of the seats they're looking to pick up. So I'm a little confused why they didn't take the opposite approach with that and talk about how one's on its way or they're going to be in process, or at least not just downplaying the concerns that a lot of people in the riding have around lack of schools in proximity to where they live.
And Vancouver Falls Creek's definitely going to be a battleground as the NDP tries again to take that from Sam Sullivan.
Yeah, the NDP also spent a good chunk of the first week kind of re-announcing the things they'd already announced, or doing the kind of greatest hits, so to speak, on their first week of touring around the province. I thought they really didn't mention any of them, but just note that the thing governments like to do of re-announcing the same things over and over again is a feature of the BC NDP as well.
Well, one thing they absolutely did not want to talk about this week was Site C, which made a little bit of news as there was another co-signed letter of 18 prominent British Columbians calling for a halt on the construction of that mega dam up north. Uh, this included largely the environmentalists you would expect, like David Suzuki and those types, but there was also a past BC Hydro president and former federal fisheries minister, David Anderson. Site C's been facing cost overruns and geotechnical issues and just a number of challenges, I think arguably beyond what was predicted in the BCUC report, the Utilities Commission report, that the government ultimately used to justify, well, we can either push ahead with this and it will cost a lot, but canceling it will cost a lot more and we won't have a dam. And now that balance seems like it's up in the air again about which was the better decision.
Yeah, although at this point, more billions of dollars have been put towards it, and the NDP have staked their own political capital on it. So, geotechnical problems or no geotechnical problems, politically, I expect this is going to continue.
It's the kind of issue that all the politicians just don't want to talk about. I think the Greens are happy to talk about because they don't have to wear this decision, but the NDP has no interest in relitigating this. The Liberals are just happy to see it continue to be built, but don't want to risk probably any Metro Vancouver votes that they need to gain debating it. But what a mess that's turned out to be.
Yeah,
I think
I'm
the
not
question,
convinced that Site C is a huge vote mover for winnable Vancouverites for the Liberals. But yeah, regardless, just big project that has cost overruns, as per big projects are wont to do. It's probably the sort of thing that the party that got the project going just doesn't want to talk about.
well, let's jump into nomination news and the various candidates who are uh, attracting some attention. I think the first main story to touch on is this one out of Surrey Fleetwood, where the BC NDP are alleging, I think this was Ravi Cologne in the news with a letter of complaint to Elections BC, that screenshots from a WhatsApp group called Gary Thind for Surrey Fleetwood include discussions about how this team's task is to, quote, register as many voters as we can by ordering ballots in mail, which, if is taken literally as meaning the Thind team for the BC Liberals will be ordering ballots on behalf of constituents, that would constitute an elections offense because you can only order your own ballot.
It's also not great on privacy grounds because you have to supply personal information to Elections BC in order to register.
Well, and within the WhatsApp group, I guess they were asking to collect driver's license numbers, birth dates, a lot more information than political parties should really have in any case. The Thind campaign and the BC Liberals are denying that any malpractice or anything illegal happened. And as far as I can tell, there's no evidence that any ballots were improperly requested or issued. It's worth noting Thind is an admin of that WhatsApp group and conversation that includes about 100 other people. But he might be still ignorant of what's on there.
Yeah, I imagine, or I think it's quite likely the structure of the campaign is like he is an admin on the group, but it's his campaign staff who are mostly running the show there, where he's off doing the in-person events, or I guess these days more digital event. He's out on the campaign trail where his staff is dealing with the WhatsApp stuff. So, ultimately the candidates where the buck stops, but in practice, I could find it believable that he's not up on everything that's going on in the WhatsApp group. And that is presuming that these allegations are in fact true, which we don't know yet, but Elections BC will no doubt be investigating.
Surrey Fleetwood was run by New Democrat Jag Brar by a margin of 53 to 36% in the 2017 elections. So probably a fairly safe constituency again this time around for the NDP, but I know the Liberals are undoubtedly very interested in picking up seats wherever they can. I think we'll have to keep following this story, although I think, as you say, most likely it's a misspeak by campaign staff rather than a intentional attempt to defraud the election. I think the only other thing I want to say on nomination news is we haven't really been keeping up, or at least I haven't been keeping up, our ongoing list of what candidates are running in which constituencies, partially just because of own time commitments and the fact that a few others have gotten on the bandwagon as well. CBC's got ongoing coverage of who the current candidates are. And as of tomorrow, today, probably by the time you're hearing this or close enough, nomination deadline will have passed, and Elections BC's website will have the current best up-to-date list. So that's your place to go, is Elections BC's website, especially after the weekend.
I've been surprised at how slow some of the even the larger parties have been at getting nominations sorted out. It's my riding still doesn't have a Liberal nomination yet. So
I was going down through the CBC list, and both of the big parties are ticking up there. They're not at 100%, but they're, I think, at 80%. So there's those fairly safe ridings. Like, both of us live in pretty solidly NDP ridings where I don't think Liberals have been named yet in either. The BC Greens are struggling all over the province, though, to fill in names. They are naming more people every day. But I think Sonia Furstenau let it slip in an interview the other day that she's not expecting to have a full slate. But hopefully we can see Greens on at least 75% of the ballots in this province.
I think in 2017 they had, it was in the 70s of how many ridings had candidates, but it definitely wasn't the full set.
Well, one prominent BC Green who won't be on the ballot this year is Cam Brewer, who we spoke to. Fellow leadership contender Kim Darwin was nominated for Powell River Sunshine Coast, but Brewer was appointed as the vice chair of the BC Greens Provincial Council. I kind of thought he was going to run, but at least he's still involved in the party.
Yeah, I mean, good he's sticking with the party, I guess. I liked a lot of the stuff he had to say during our conversation with him, so it's kind of a little disappointing he's not actually running.
But otherwise, we'll keep our eyes on nomination news. And I guess we'll find out by next week how many parties have full slates. I think at last time I saw, the Libertarians were slightly higher in number than the BC Conservatives. Although the BC Conservatives this week did score Ryan Warawa to run in Langley East. Warawa is the son of a prominent former federal Conservative who's run there, and Ryan's been involved in Conservative politics in Metro Vancouver and BC for a little while now, and so that'll make that race a bit interesting. That's also the race that just clued in for me, where the NDP had a candidate for a day before he disappeared.
Oh yeah, that is a riding that has had its fair share of controversies. So yeah, a local city councillor got the nomination and then promptly stepped down after some backlash.
Yeah, this was Eric Woodward. He's pretty popular, I guess, as Langley Township councillor. He was the second highest vote getter, and the NDP launched it with a bit of fanfare, saying he was kind of a star candidate there.
He's a little outside the typical NDP mold, so in that sense was a fairly decent get.
He's got quite a long resume of sorts in terms of activism or involvement in the local community. He, I think, was originally famous for being frustrated with unable to deal with some development applications, and so he painted all the houses on a block pink. And there's some other weird stories like that. None of that seemed too disqualifying, but immediately after the announcement, some local Indigenous voices spoke out, questioning why the NDP would run this guy based on their past run-ins with them. Some other things came out on Twitter. Woodward described all of this as truly horrible false personal attacks and withdrew his candidacy after 24 hours and said he's not even going to run as an independent. He's just going to stick with Langley East. I think it came out even later than that he'd apparently been sniffing around a BC Liberal nomination as well. So it all seemed a bit weird. And it kind of brought into question this idea of, did the BC NDP not vet this guy properly? And I think it's worth always remembering that parties do, at least we assume, a fairly thorough job vetting, and you never know what happens with those vetting reviews. Sometimes the higher ups in the party might just overrule, hoping that, or overlook some of the flags that were raised, saying, you know what, this is still an interesting candidate who might do really well. And then it blows up in your face. But Langley East will still be an interesting riding to watch.
Yes, I took a look at some Facebook ad spending this week, didn't you?
Yeah, I mentioned last week that I want to try and do this every week, and I think this week is really interesting because this week we saw the BC Liberals massively outspend the BC NDP 2-1, essentially. Once you add up what the BC Liberal Party spent and what they spent on Andrew Wilkinson's personal page, or his political page, as it were, the Libs spent about $80,000 to the NDP's $37,000. The BC Greens spent about $1,200, including $13 on Sonia Furstenau's page. $0 was spent on John Horgan's page. So I'm not going to knock the Greens for not spending more on Furstenau's page. I'm just curious why it was only 13. It's one small ad.
It's one of those things where the 13 is weirder than either 0 or a multi-$1,000 ad spend. Like $13. I spent a while since placing Facebook ads, but that's only a few hundred to 1,000 or 2 impressions. I think it's not a huge amount. You don't get much reach for that.
It may have just started. They may have just started an ad on there, so I won't fault them too much. Digging into what kind of ads the NDP and Greens and Liberals are all running, I thought was also very interesting. Scrolling down through the long list of active ads the NDP has was fascinating. For comparison, the Liberals had about 10 different kinds of ads running. A couple were even just variations on the same theme. The Greens had about 4. The Green ads were mostly promoting news coverage of the Green Party that was positive. The Liberals were going on about local businesses, the homeless tent city stuff they've been talking about. They talked about how you can't trust the NDP on LNG because candidate Nikki Sharma has spoken against LNG before. They've talked about a petition wanting more school options and fear-mongering about the home equity tax. But I think the most interesting BC Liberal ad was one that attacked the BC Conservatives, saying we need a united vote to take on the NDP. And if the Liberals do think they need to worry about their right flank, is also kind of telling for how their campaign strategy is shaping up.
Yeah, a ad doesn't actually cost all that much to throw together and get off a bed and target a few ridings. I could easily see a case where it's just we're gonna put a very small amount of effort to try and shore things up without being significantly concerned about the broader state of how well they're going to do.
But in comparison to the small numbers of ads for the Liberals or Greens, the NDP were running dozens of ads. There were a lot of variations of the same kind of positive ad that just switched the phrasing a little bit. They would mention specific ridings that they were trying to target. They had a few versions that were in Hindi targeting Surrey of this positive ad that were subtitled in Hindi. The ridings they mentioned included the two in Coquitlam, Burke Mountain and Mallardville, North Vancouver Lonsdale, Fraser Nicola, Vancouver Langara, Vancouver Falls Creek, Cowichan Valley, North Island, Skeena, Maple Ridge Mission, Richmond Queensboro, Vancouver Fraserview, Surrey Guilford, and Burnaby Deer Lake, which is my own riding, which is a very safe NDP riding that I thought was weird on that list.
Yeah, it's just a little surprised to see North Vancouver Lonsdale. The NDP won it by a decentish, not a huge, but like a decentish margin. Bow and Maw's fairly popular. They're like, with everything else going on, like doesn't seem a particularly likely Liberal pickup.
I think they really want to shore up that vote. Losing her would, I mean, it would mean they couldn't get government, but she has attracted a bit of a reputation. And so making sure you're building out that vote can't hurt. Some of the other less positive ads they were running were attack ads and Wilkinson. Those hit a bunch of those, really just going after the Liberals' connection to big business, or saying that the PST cut promised would benefit, quote, Maserati buyers.
So I go back to what we're talking about at the start. Like that just seems like such a weak line of attack to use on it.
I think, didn't the Liberals also clarify later that some of the luxury surtaxes wouldn't be cut under their view?
Yeah,
like they're not cutting the PST on cannabis and a couple other things too.
Yeah, certain items actually have a non-standard PST value that isn't the 7%. One of those is cars over 125,000, so that wouldn't change. The cannabis, like you said, wouldn't change. Oddly enough, I think aircraft and boats got exempted or would be included in the reduction in the PST, which like I mean, I don't have a problem if someone wants to go and buy a boat. But like, it seems like a weird thing to specifically include in the PST, and does open them up to the, benefit yacht buyers, which would be a slightly more on point attack. It's still not great in the sense that, well, for the reasons we mentioned at the start, that it's broad, everyone pays it. It's still probably a better line of attack than what the Liberals are doing about the empty homes tax, which is only 75% popular, and like anyone who's really pissed off about that wasn't going to be voting for anyone but the Liberals anyway.
No, the BC Liberals are running ads saying the NDP are going to bring in a home equity tax, meaning that if you sell your principal residence, you will face a capital gains tax on the amount of money that you've magically gained because of the market.
I mean, that's the sort of
no one has talked about.
Yeah, no one's talked about it. I mean, a few like policy wonk types are probably really happy to hear that as to be discussed, but like, yeah, nobody is touching that one. So
the NDP are also running ads mentioning past campaign promises like MSP cuts, ferries, ICBC reform, etc., and some petitions like their discussion of, or their effort to get the BC Libs to condemn homophobia and kick Laurie Thronis out, which isn't going to happen, but is going to keep making the BC Libs look bad. And I think most tellingly is the NDP are running a bunch of ads telling people to vote. They're like meme videos showing you how to vote by mail. And I think that really emphasizes their confidence that if they can get people to vote early and vote now, they've locked in their vote. I mean, if these polls are correct, you don't need to campaign anymore. You just need to get people to vote.
Yeah, it does mean if something drastic happens and they absolutely tank, yeah, they would have locked in enough that it could be enough to assure their victory, even if things radically change over the next couple of weeks. And since ballots are out, I mean, I've got mine. I saw on Facebook you got yours as well. Yeah, people can be voting already now, so that's definitely a move that made sense for them to make.
Well, and speaking of the polls, I'll keep following the Facebook ads over the next few weeks and see if anything
Oh,
else interesting pops
so
up.
I didn't have a chance to go through all this the giant lad library. I do have to ask, those really like super cheesy, awkward videos of John Horton like calling people that is so clearly staged, it's kind of cringy. Did those get ad money thrown at them?
Not in the last week. I didn't look closely at before that, but the last week or at least they're not active right now.
That's probably a smart move on the NDP's part, because those videos were bad.
Well, despite those bad videos, the two polls out this week from Ipsos and Leger both put the NDP in a very strong position. Ipsos has the NDP at 51% over the Liberals 33%. Leger has the NDP at 47% to the Liberals 31%. Both have the Greens at 12%. Leger gives the Conservatives 9%. Ipsos just bunches others at 4%. Both stronger numbers than I think we saw last week, where the NDP was a little bit lower. Not significantly, but enough that there was a question whether things were starting to turn for the NDP because of the election call. And this, I think, just buoys their spirits again.
Yeah, it's a bad spot for both the Liberals and the Greens as well. Like 12% is a decent amount lower than they got last time, and puts at risk the seats they currently hold. And it's something, if I was the Greens, I'd be sweating about quite a bit and really thinking about how to close that gap.
Yeah, it's quite, most projections, I think, aren't showing the Greens having a good chance at taking back Oak Bay Gordon Head. And I think the candidate they nominated there didn't end up having a giant profile that can build during an election, but it seems like they're not quite ready to hold on to the gains they made in 2017, let alone advance them. But again, the campaign is still early.
Yeah, I think Sonia Farsteneau is probably fairly safe in her seat, although that that can always change. But yeah, Adam Olson's probably going to be in a fight for the his riding was pretty much a three-way split, like two elections ago, with them barely losing, and he managed to do not too bad last time. But it's still a case where the North Saanich and the North Saanich and the Islands. Riding, yeah, North. I should know that. I used to live there. But yeah, it is a case where that can be a quite competitive riding with like sizable votes from each party there. So it's definitely the case where interesting things can happen as the votes move by even a small amount. Yeah, I'm actually looking back at the old one. So yeah, 2017 he had a good 11-point lead, but the 2013 election, Saanich North and the Islands, was basically a 33-32-32 vote. And the election before that was a 44-44. There was like 44.9 to 44.1. That is a riding that has fairly often in the past delivered very close results. So if I was the Greens, I would be sweating a bit about showing back, about the prospect of coming back with only one seat and maybe fewer.
We'll keep an eye on the Greens as well as the other parties as we continue our weekly election coverage.
Well, let's move on to a couple quick takes to quickly round out the episode. Is it in bad taste to say the country has election fever? Is that a too soon thing in 2020? Anyway, I only ask because Saskatchewan has decided they should also go to the polls. Although this one, I think, was case of the upcoming election was fairly set in ahead of time. But
Yeah, it was a
regardless,
fixed election date.
yeah, it's a mixed election day. So regardless, their legislature got dissolved on Tuesday. The campaign is kicked off, and the Sask Party is currently polling at 62%. So it is not even close.
Yeah, the NDP is at 33% there. It's been a pretty one party state since 2007 when Brad Wall kind of removed the NDP from power and has just become the Sask Party's domain. Saskatchewan will go to the polls 2 days after BC, actually, but I don't know if we'll see much change there. It's quite a wider margin than even the BC NDP are holding right now. So I
Yeah,
think I saw that Ryan Mealy is the Saskatchewan NDP leader, and he's promised a wealth tax, but they'll have to swing for the fences on this one and
yeah,
slowly keep building.
I'm not sure how effective that's really going to be. Well, Tats in Saskatchewan.
They have rich people too.
Yeah, but like, I'm not necessarily sure that's really tapping into kind of the Saskatchewan zeitgeist. Although, maybe the leader of the Saskatchewan NDP has a better sense than I do of that. But um, it does seem to be the case where I guess the NDP's like national brand is kind of a little off from where Saskatchewan is, and that may be heard in the local branch of the party.
I can't pretend to know much about Saskatchewan politics, so I think I'll leave it there. I guess we'll check in when that campaign is over, unless something really exciting happens there. Otherwise, we'll stay focused on our own election. Where we won't be seeing an election, at least in the very short term, is federally, as the COVID response bill, Bill C4, passed the House this week, and it seems like the government won't fall over that, and it seems like the NDP are satisfied enough that they'll be willing to support the government's throne speech. What's more notable, though,
I think the
is that
speech vote already happened.
there'll be a couple, I believe.
They
do
survived
have
the first confidence vote back.
Yeah. This COVID response bill, though, got held up in the Senate today as the leader of the Canadian Senators group, Scott Tanis, which I believe is the independent senators who are somewhat conservative leaning, but they don't want to join the capital C Conservative Party senators. Keeping up with Senate partisanship, independent partisanship, as it were, is a little bit confusing.
Yeah,
But
like
anyway,
a wall with like all the senators and like bits of string connected. It's confusing.
Tanis is upset that the Senate doesn't actually have a way to meet safely with all of the senators right now. They have been doing a small number of meetings with a very small number of senators to pass bills without much scrutiny as they come up from the House. But that kind of defeats the entire purpose of the Senate, which is a chamber of sober second thought, not a rubber stamp on emergency legislation. And so the question is, why hasn't government leader in the Senate, Senator Mark Gold, brought forward a motion to resume Senate sessions in some kind of hybrid sitting where some senators can attend virtually and others do in person? It seems like the excuse is he wants a unanimous consensus, and the capital C Conservatives aren't willing to give that because they allegedly want everyone to attend in person, and if you get COVID, use your sick days. Which is dumb.
Yeah, I kind of get like the gut level thing of why the Conservatives in both houses feel like it's very important to have people actually in the chambers debating and stuff. But yeah, no, that does need to give way to the actual realities of the current situation. And yeah, if you don't need the unanimous vote, don't wait for it. Like, the House of Commons already went through this. The Conservatives in the House who did complain about it, they got like a couple days media attention, but like it was a blip on the radar, and even fewer people listen to what the senators have to say. So it's not going to be a thing if they just decide to go ahead and get this hybrid model up and running without a unanimous vote.
Yeah, every provincial legislature has done it. The UK Parliament and House of Lords have done it. I think one of the quotes in this CBC piece we'll link to from either Tanis or the leader of the Independent Senate group, who are both in favor of just pushing on with a hybrid model, is that they might be the last Westminster Parliament system to agree to move ahead with this. Like, they might be the last legislature in the world to not have a hybrid model yet. I don't know if that's true, but yeah, get on with it. I mean, one of the reasons they'll have to get on with it is there's a few bills coming from the House beyond these actual budget or spending bills. The Liberals have reintroduced a couple pieces of legislation today and I believe yesterday to try to get their agenda moving after they prorogued. Those are the effort to make September 30th the National Truth and Reconciliation Day, and they would make it a stat holiday for federally regulated workers. And also the conversion therapy ban was reintroduced. These are bills that were introduced earlier in the year. I think the Truth and Reconciliation Day made it to the Senate. Conversion therapy ban bill didn't make it past first reading. The Liberals were bad at getting their bills through.
They're still bad at getting their bills through. I mean, we were just talking about how like the big, very important piece of legislation has gotten held up in the Senate. Like, since 2015, they have been terrible at just moving bills along and doing like the basics of legislation management in Parliament.
I mean, at least the House unanimously passed that COVID response bill. The Conservatives and Bloc did vote against it at the first couple readings just because they objected a bit to the fast track version necessity of it and to make a statement about the Liberals proroguing.
Which is fair, because if they hadn't prorogued, you wouldn't need to fast track it.
Oh, fully agree. In the end, they all did vote in favor of making sure Canadians have benefits, and that was the right move, I think, on all of their parts, even if it wasn't the perfect bill. Hold the government to account somewhere else. Don't hold Canadians hostage, to make that point. But yeah, hopefully these other bills move forward. I think they're both reasonable, although there's probably ways they could be better.
Yeah, undoubtedly, particularly with this Liberal government, it seems. And that has been Policoast. Find links to everything we talked about at policoast.ca. Support the show and get access to our Slack channel at patreon.com/Policoast. Our intro music credit is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikoff. Policoast is a production of Legend Boot Media, and editing services are provided by CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Wash your hands and stay home. Thanks for listening.